Okay, I'm Professor Benavides, and I want to go ahead and give you my rendition of functional methods. All right, so this particular chapter continues from the previous, which discussed procedural methods. And the big difference here is that now we're going to have a method that's going to have a return type. Okay, so instead of void, it's going to go ahead and return a particular data type. Plus, we're going to delve a little bit more examples of more complex methods utilizing different numbers of parameters, as well as methods in other classes and things of that nature. So stay tuned here. Functional methods on here. Here we see a little review of the distinction between procedural and functional methods. And you can tell what it is by by the way the name sounds when you're looking at them inside of Alice. So if it says get, it's a function. If it says say, it's a procedure. And again, the API is a very important place to look up the methods that are available to us so that we don't have to be reinventing the wheel. Here we see a little drill down into the JOption pane class. And from here, we take a look at the show input dialog method. We see that this particular method is overloaded, and that means that it takes a different number of parameters. And when you call it, if you call it with the correct number of parameters, it'll know which method to go ahead and use. And we pretty much code that way as well. So here again, we continue to see some of the characteristics of the show input dialog box with reference to the icon that you can have here. And then we move on to the syntax review, which is pretty much the same thing that we saw in the previous chapter, but we drill down on it again so that we understand the difference between a procedure and a function. The big difference here is that now we're going to be dealing with the return type. We had parameters before. So basically, if your method doesn't have parameters, it's referred to as a parameterless method. If it, but the big thing here is the return type. So it's gonna, so not only you're gonna have a return type, but you're gonna have to have a return statement, and they must agree. So if you say you're gonna return a double, you must return a double. So let's just drill down on this to what looks different here. Method names, still have to comply with, the same old rules for variable declarations. And then that brings us to some of the examples here. This particular example called square it receives X and simply squares it. Here we see the code in NetBeans, and the definition is down here on line 18, where square it receives X. And see how we have, this is the return statement. So it receives, so think of the parenthesis as the funnel in. This method, square it, receives a double. A double times a double is a double, and it's being returned. So we have agreement here. I am returning a double, and I have said in the definition that I'm returning a double. So things are cool. So she then walks you through line by line as to what everything means, and then that brings us, to the hands-on exercises. So let's go ahead and go through the review. She actually puts a lot of stuff in the exercises that you need to understand. So let's go ahead and go through the summary, and then we'll go through some live code to see if we can experience some of that. Okay. So methods are a series of statements that performs a particular task. A general definition on here. She gives us a review of the syntax for a method. Again, here the return type being a significant thing to learn in this particular chapter. Not only do we have to have a return type, but we must have a return statement, and they must agree. Okay. Other important things that she discusses here is having methods in other classes. I'll show you an example of that in the code. She also talks about the private method. That becomes a little bit more important when you talk about object-oriented programming. But for right now, all of our methods are public. They can be accessed not only from the current class, but from other classes. Of course, we haven't gotten to the point of dealing with other classes, but we'll get a small experience for that in this chapter when she puts some methods in a separate class and then calls them from main with the dot operator. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go into some live code now. And again, I've got my code commented out. So let me go ahead and uncomment it. And this is code directly from the book. I just copied where I could and typed in where I couldn't. Like when she's got it into an image, you have to actually go ahead and type that in. Even though I did get the code provided as professor, I like to go ahead and type in all my own code. So here it is. This is what we're going to do here. We're going to assign 5 to number, and then we're going to call square it and pass it 5. Okay? So it just simply says, S out. 5 has a square of, so square it receives number. So right now, basically, I went ahead and went to the source on there. Square it receives X. All it does is return it. It returns it, and it returns it back to the place from which it was called. Okay? So if you look at the definition on here, the things to learn here, look at this. The return type and the return statement. This method also has one parameter. It can have many parameters. And when we call the method inside of main, when we call the method, we're going to have to go ahead and match up in terms of number, sequence, and type. Okay. This first example here, we see a call to the method, and we pass it a variable. Then we call the method again, and we pass it a numeric literal. The return from this method is then being assigned to a variable called square num, which is of type double. Then I go ahead and construct a sentence based upon that. So in other words, when I do my concatenation on here, I'm concatenating with square num rather than a call to the method. So there's just different ways of doing pretty much the same thing. Okay. So that's square it. Let me go ahead and go ahead and comment that out, and let's go ahead and work with the next one. The next little batch. In this little batch, what I do, and this is based upon some code that she shows, but I work out all of it. Instead of prompting you for the height and the weight, I just went ahead and assigned that to my height, my weight. And put that into variables. So then when I call calc BMI, I pass it my height, my weight. Let's look at the excuse me, definition of this. Let's just down here. A little dry. Calc BMI. In this particular definition, this is what I see. I'm returning a double. I'm receiving, I have two parameter variables. They're local to this method. You could just do one return statement, but I'm breaking it down into 3 parts. I'm declaring BMI as a variable, then I'm doing the equation, and then I'm returning BMI. If I wanted to, I could just go ahead and say return and then this equation. It's up to you. What's important here is to note that I'm returning BMI. BMI is a double, and my return type is double. Okay? So that should work out right there. Let's go ahead and run it. Now I do a few other little things, on here. This is stuff in another class. I probably should mess with that later. Let me go ahead and comment that part out, and then so I can just deal with this little BMI story. You know, I don't want to cover too many things on here. All right. So let's just run it. So basically, you can already imagine what's going to happen here. As soon as it gets to line 18, this calc BMI flow of control is going to go down over there to the definition. Let me just go ahead and run it. Let's just see what the answer is. So it says at the bottom here, you'll see it says my BMI is, and that's the number. Okay. So what happened here is it passed 60 into my height, 120 into my weight, and then it came down over here and it put those two things into H and W. It's many times good to use different variable names so that when you're doing debugging, you can go ahead and know which one is which, the scope of it. So it returns BMI, and BMI is then assigned to a variable called my BMI. I then use that in the concatenation or the creation of output. Very similar to what we just covered before in her demos. This was also in the book, but I just went ahead and embellished it a little bit more. Okay. So let's go ahead and comment that out. Let's just go on to the next one. Now, in this next one here, this is going to be a little demo to something that she covers in the exercise. I mean, she may refer to it in the book, but not with some, code. In this particular example here, notice how I've got random class dot generate random number. So random class is another class, and gen random is another method. Let me show you the methods first. So basically what happened is you have to go file and create another class that's empty without main. And inside of here, of course, I imported random, the random class, and I created several little methods in here. The first one, let me just go over them all, I guess, and then I'll come back to it. This one here just generates a random number between 1 and 10. Okay. This other one here has a parameter variable, and what it does, this is my little demo of something she talked about, which is the overloaded method. Notice how it's got the same name as above. The only difference here is the signature, right? The signature of this method has is different. It has a parameter variable. So when I call it, if I call it with one argument, it's going to go and use this one here rather than the other one. Okay. So this is referred to as an overloaded method. So basically, this one just does a random number between 1 and 10, and this other one will do a random number with whatever I pass into X. This last one on here, and I'll generates a random number between a min and max. So if I say I want a random number between 5 and 10, I pass 5 and 10 in here, and then it goes into this equation and gives me back a number between whatever range I want. Okay, so let's go through these. So the first one on here, this is just a plain old random number 1 to 10. Okay, and then this next one here, instead of prompting the user or saying, I just go ahead and assign 5 to num and pass num to gen ran num. Notice, in order to access those methods in that other class, I have to use the dot operator. So it's class name dot method. That's the syntax. So notice that there's no conflict between these two methods because they differ on the signature. Okay, so in this other one here, this one here in the middle is I go ahead and print out a number between 1 and 5. And then in this last example on here, I'm passing a range. Oh, excuse me. The second one was just a max of from 1 to the max. This last one here provides the min and max. Okay, so that's what it was. So the first one does not, just 1 to 10. The second one passes 5 as the top. So it goes from 1 to 5, and this other one is going from 5 to 10. So let me just go ahead and run that. And every time I run this, you'll see I've got a random number between 1 and 5. And if I continue to click run here, it should generate more numbers within that range. And it's working. Okay. All right, so that's used. It's kind of like a library, right? This putting methods in another class is kind of like having a library of methods that you can go ahead and use. This is just a stepping stone concept to our object-oriented programming, where we will be using multiple files with classes in them that we will be utilizing. So we just gotta just hang tight for right now, until we get to that point in time. But other than that, that's pretty much my rendition of functions. Again, it's pretty much a repeat of procedures. The big difference on here is that we've got a return type and we've got a return statement. And this chapter also discussed putting methods in a separate class and calling them by means of the dot operator. That one, thank you very much.